The billionaire thought it was just a joke, a riddle no one could solve. But when the janitor he'd never bothered to notice wrote the answer in silence, every truth he'd been running from came crashing down. One man had everything but humility. The other had nothing but truth. When pride meets quiet brilliance, the cost isn't money, it's meaning. When the billionaire laughed and said, "Solve it and $800 million is yours," every executive chuckled, except the janitor sweeping the floor, who whispered to himself, "I already have." Hey there, my amazing family, welcome back. Get comfortable, grab a drink, and settle in, because today's story is going to pull at your heart in all the right ways. If you're excited already, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I've got another powerful story waiting for you, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. The city looked like liquid gold from the top floor of Ward Technologies. Glass walls framed a skyline that glittered with rain, and at the center of it all sat Ethan Ward, the man everyone called the Silicon King. His suits were custom, his watch alone worth a house, and yet his eyes carried the dull shine of a man who had won everything and felt nothing. He leaned back in his leather chair as his board of directors argued about numbers, patents, and projections. To them, Ethan's word was gospel. To Ethan, their words were noise. "Gentlemen," he said finally, tapping his pen against the mahogany table, "we're stuck because you're all thinking like accountants, not innovators." Nervous laughter. One brave voice ventured, "What do you propose, sir?" Ethan smirked, rose, and scribbled a long equation on the glass wall. "Solve this. Whoever cracks it gets a personal bonus, let's say $800 million. The room fell silent, then erupted in laughter. They thought he was joking. Ethan laughed too, but there was an emptiness in it. He liked the feeling of control, the way people's laughter followed his like an echo. Outside, the janitorial crew began its shift. David Cole pushed his mop bucket across the polished floor, moving carefully so the wheels wouldn't squeak. No one ever looked at him twice. He'd been invisible so long he'd learned to fade in and out of rooms like a shadow. But David wasn't just a janitor. On his cart, tucked behind a spray bottle, was a torn copy of Advanced Linear Systems. He'd been working on that same equation, almost the same structure, for months during his breaks. He didn't need $800 million. What he needed was proof that he still mattered. As the executives filed out, still laughing, Ethan stayed behind, gazing at his reflection in the glass wall. He saw power, yes, but no purpose. Downstairs, David cleaned the empty cafeteria, humming faint jazz. A photo of a young woman and a little girl peeked from his wallet beside the time card. He whispered to it, "We're still trying, baby." The hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the rhythm of his mop strokes. He didn't mind silence. It had become his truest friend. Yet tonight felt different, charged. Maybe it was the storm outside. Maybe it was the way Ethan's challenge had carried through the vents, a cruel kind of music. Later that night, David was assigned to the top floor. He always saved it for last. The boardroom lights were still on, the equation glowing faintly on the glass. He studied it, recognizing patterns, errors, even. He picked up a marker, hesitated, then began writing, slow and sure. Numbers. Symbols. A quiet dance of mind and memory. He solved it in 15 minutes. He didn't smile. He didn't even take a picture. He capped the pen, looked at the board and whispered, 800 million, or maybe just peace. He wiped his hands, put the marker down, and walked away. The next morning, Ethan strode in, coffee in hand, already annoyed at the day's schedule. His assistant gasped. "Sir, the equation, someone solved it." The room froze. Ethan's gaze flicked to the glass wall. Every symbol aligned perfectly. It was elegant, clean, beautiful. He looked at his staff. Who did this? No one spoke. When the cleaning supervisor timidly mentioned David's name, a ripple of disbelief spread. Ethan chuckled, a cold, disbelieving sound. The janitor? He laughed again, sharper this time. I love this company. He turned back to the board and stared. Something deep in him shifted, a tremor he refused to name. He told himself it had to be a fluke, luck, or plagiarism. But a part of him, a quiet, unguarded part, was curious. Meanwhile, David finished his shift downstairs, unaware that his world was about to change. He clocked out, raincoat slung over his shoulder, walking past luxury cars and glass doors that never opened for men like him. He didn't notice the security camera zooming in as he left. He didn't know Ethan Ward had ordered his profile pulled from HR within the hour. Ethan stood at his window, staring down at the city. The laughter that had once made him feel powerful now echoed like guilt. Who was this man who'd cracked the unsolvable? What else had he missed while looking down? He pressed the intercom. Find him, he said quietly. The janitor. David Cole. If someone like Ethan mocked you with that kind of challenge, would you have had the courage to speak up? Or would you have stayed quiet like David? Be honest, comment below. The morning after the discovery, Ward Technologies buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Rumors flew faster than emails. By noon, even the security guards were whispering it. The janitor solved the impossible riddle. David arrived that afternoon for his shift, unaware that his quiet world had become front-page gossip within the company. He noticed the stares immediately, half awe, half ridicule. He adjusted his gloves, murmuring, "Evening," but no one answered. When he reached the top floor, Ethan Ward was waiting. The CO stood by the whiteboard like a king guarding his throne. He didn't look angry, he looked curious, which was somehow worse. David Cole, Ethan said evenly. Close the door. David froze. Sir? Close it, Ethan repeated, voice low. The soft click of the door was louder than thunder. Ethan turned toward the glass wall, tapping the equation with a silver pen. You know what this is? David hesitated. I cleaned it up last night, sir. Ethan smirked. Cleaned it up? The pause. Then Ethan walked toward him. You expect me to believe a janitor solved something my top engineers couldn't? Did someone help you? Maybe you copied it. David's gaze didn't waver. No, sir. The silence stretched until Ethan laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You're serious? Yes, sir. Ethan's amusement turned to something else. He studied the man before him, creased uniform, worn hands, tired eyes, but behind them there was something powerful. Still, his pride couldn't let him see it clearly. He poured himself a drink and gestured to the whiteboard. Explain it to me then. David swallowed hard. It's simpler than it looks. The variable's not the problem, it's the way it's framed. You reverse two functions to make it unsolvable, but if you mirror the equation, the system finds equilibrium. That's all. Ethan blinked. That's all. David shrugged, awkwardly. It's elegant, sir. For the first time in years, Ethan felt speechless. He walked closer. Where did you learn to think like that? David hesitated. MIT. Ethan frowned. You went to MIT? Before my wife got sick, David said softly. I dropped out. Never finished. The words landed like quiet thunder. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city lights blinked against the glass wall like distant stars. Finally, Ethan said, Do you know what $800 million could do? David smiled faintly. Probably ruin my life. Ethan almost laughed, almost. You're not wrong. Then, after a pause, he asked, Why didn't you say anything? You could have walked into my office this morning and changed everything. David looked down at his hands. People like me don't get believed, sir. It's easier to stay quiet. That line hit Ethan somewhere he didn't expect. For the first time, he saw not a janitor but a man, a mirror he hadn't realized he'd needed. He turned toward the window, hiding the strange heaviness building in his chest. "Go back to work, Mr. Cole. I'll be in touch." David nodded, turned, and left the room as quietly as he'd entered. But the building didn't stay quiet. By morning, the story had leaked. A janitor solves Billionaire's riddle. The media caught wind, employees whispered, and investors laughed behind Ethan's back. Some said Ethan had planned it, a PR stunt. Others said he'd lost control of his company. But what really disturbed him wasn't the noise, it was the truth. He found himself staring at that equation again and again, wondering, how had I never seen it? That night, unable to sleep, he drove to the office. The building was dark except for the janitor's closet light. Through the small glass window, he saw David sitting at a folding table, pencil in hand, scribbling diagrams on scrap paper. No music, no laptop, just raw thought. Ethan watched silently for a full minute before knocking. David startled, then stood up. "Mr. Ward, sir." Ethan gestured. "Don't stop. I was just curious." David shook his head. "It's nothing, sir. Just something to keep my mind busy." "Mind busy?" Ethan echoed. He stepped closer, eyeing the sketches, engineering schematics, formula strings, hand-drawn machine designs. Not the work of a cleaner. The work of a visionary. "Why are you wasting your time here?" Ethan blurted out before he could stop himself. David stiffened. "Because time's all I can afford." That answer lingered in the air. Ethan sighed and rubbed his temples. "You've got something most people spend lifetimes chasing. You know that, right?" David shook his head. "I had it once. Lost it." "To what?" He hesitated. "To love my wife. My daughter." The softness of his voice made Ethan turn away. Something in him cracked, but he wasn't ready to show it. He cleared his throat. "You'll come to my office tomorrow." David nodded. "Yes, sir." As Ethan left, he caught his reflection in the glass door. The arrogant man who had mocked a janitor now haunted by his own laughter. Outside, the rain began again, tapping the roof like a metronome. Somewhere below, David watched it fall, whispering to himself, "Don't get your hopes up, man. You've been invisible too long to shine now." But fate had already chosen differently. The story had spread beyond Ward Technologies. News outlets were already calling it the janitor's equation. By the second morning, Ethan Ward's billion-dollar empire was a meme. Comment sections filled with jokes and moral lectures. Billionaire schooled by janitor. Maybe real genius wears gloves, not suits. Ethan sat in his glass office, scrolling through the headlines, jaw tight. He hated how the world twisted everything into humiliation. He should have been impressed, but instead, all he felt was cornered. His board demanded a statement. His PR team wanted to spin it as inspiration. Ethan Ward's company celebrates diversity of thought, one suggested. Ethan slammed his laptop shut. "We're not turning this into a pity story," he snapped. "This isn't charity." Downstairs, David arrived for his shift, only to be stopped by two security guards. "Mr. Cole," one said awkwardly, "we'll need your badge." "CEO's orders. Temporary suspension pending review." David's heart sank. Suspension? For solving a problem? "Sorry, sir. Just doing what we're told." He handed over his ID slowly, swallowing the hurt that rose like a lump in his throat. "I understand." As he turned to leave, dozens of employees watched. Some sympathetic, most curious. One whispered, "Guess he flew too close to the sun." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked through his empty penthouse, the city glittering like broken glass below. Every reflection showed him his own hypocrisy. He picked up his phone, typed a message to David, then deleted it. Pride burned through his chest. He's just a janitor, he told himself. He doesn't understand the cost of this world. But another voice, quieter, asked, "Then why can't you forget him?" He poured a drink, turned on the news, and saw David's face flash across the screen. Someone had leaked his story. David Cole, a janitor at Ward Technologies, once studied engineering at MIT before dropping out to care for his sick wife. Colleagues describe him as kind, quiet, and hardworking. The anchor added softly, "Perhaps we've all underestimated what brilliance looks like." Ethan muted the TV, staring into the silence. He hated how the truth made him feel small. Meanwhile, David sat in his tiny apartment on the city's south side. The walls were thin, the sound of neighbors arguing seeped through. His daughter, Lila, slept on the couch, her backpack beside her. He brushed a hand over her curls and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. Daddy's just trying to figure things out." On the table lay a crumpled newspaper with Ethan's picture, smiling, powerful, untouchable. David's phone buzzed. A known number. He hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice. "Mr. Cole? This is Marissa Lee from Channel 5. We'd love to interview you about your equation. The world deserves to hear your story." David froze. "No, I'm not interested." "Are you sure? You could inspire millions." He hung up. He didn't want fame. He wanted fairness. The next day, Ethan faced the board again. One of them, a sharp woman named Vivian Cross, leaned forward. "You need to handle this before it handles you. Bring the man in. Offer him hush money or a partnership, something clean." Ethan's pride snapped. "He doesn't belong in my boardroom." Vivian smiled coldly. "Neither will you if this keeps going." Those words lingered like a wound. That night, Ethan drove through the rain to the industrial district. He didn't even know why, until he realized where he was headed. The janitor's address sat in his dashboard log from HR. He parked outside a dimly lit building, watching through the cracked blinds. Inside, David was tutoring neighborhood kids with old math textbooks and a donated whiteboard. Ethan sat in the car for an hour, watching. The man who had embarrassed him wasn't gloating, he was giving, teaching, smiling. And Ethan, lonely, rich, powerful Ethan, felt like the poorest man alive. He left without knocking. Days passed. Both men stayed silent. Ethan buried himself in work, David in routine. Yet the world kept talking. Online comments debated race, class, fairness. Some praised David, others mocked him. The pressure on Ward Technologies grew unbearable. Finally, one late evening, Ethan called his assistant. "Bring him in," he said quietly. "Tomorrow morning. No cameras, no lawyers." When David arrived, the office felt different, emptier. Ethan looked tired, older. "Mr. Cole," Ethan said, standing. "Sit." David did. Silence stretched. "I suspended you," Ethan admitted. "That was wrong." David nodded but didn't speak. "I don't like being the joke," Ethan continued. "And you made me one, unintentionally, I know. But you did." David looked up, calm. "I didn't make you the joke, sir. The way you handled it did." Ethan blinked. It was the first time anyone had spoken to him that way in years. The two men locked eyes, equal, for just a heartbeat. Ethan's voice softened. "You really solved it?" David smiled faintly. "Yes, sir. And I can prove it again." For the first time, Ethan didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly. "All right, then prove it." And with that, a door cracked open, not just in the company, but in both their hearts. Neither of them knew that what started as suspicion would soon turn into something neither expected, understanding. A week after their uneasy meeting, The story still dominated the media. Investors demanded answers. The board demanded a plan. Ethan Ward's empire teetered between admiration and mockery. Vivian Cross, his shrewdest board member, cornered him after a tense meeting. Ward Technologies needs a redemption story, Ethan, she said sharply. The world already loves the janitor. Make him part of the company before someone else does. Ethan stared at her. You want me to parade him around like a trophy? No. I want you to look human for once. Her words stung, because they were true. That night, Ethan opened his laptop and typed a single line in an email draft. Subject: collaboration proposal. Body: let's fix the mess we both created. EW. He deleted it twice before finally pressing send. The next morning, David arrived at the corporate tower wearing his old work uniform. He expected more humiliation, maybe another firing. Instead, the receptionist smiled nervously and handed him a visitor badge marked Temporary Consultant. He blinked. Consultant. Mr. Ward's orders, she said softly. Top floor. David's palms sweated as the elevator rose. When the doors opened, Ethan was already waiting, hands in pockets, looking uncomfortable in his own office. Mr. Cole, he began. The board wants a new innovation initiative. Something radical. They want us, he hesitated, to co-lead it. David stared. You and me. This. Publicly. David's first instinct was to say no. But then he saw the flicker of sincerity, small, fragile, in Ethan's eyes. So instead, he said quietly, All right, let's get to work. Their first few days were chaos. Ethan's perfectionism clashed with David's patience. You can't just guess at variables, Ethan snapped one morning. I'm not guessing, David replied calmly. I'm trusting intuition. Ethan scoffed. Science isn't intuition. David smiled faintly. Neither is leadership. But you do that by instinct too, don't you? That shut Ethan up. As the days passed, the hostility softened. David's unconventional methods began producing results. He saw problems from angles Ethan had never considered, shapes and patterns invisible to overtrained minds. At first, Ethan resisted, then reluctantly admired. They stayed late into the night, side by side at glowing screens. When the janitorial staff passed by, David's old colleagues nodded respectfully. Some even whispered, We're proud of you, man. Ethan noticed how David spoke to them, with warmth, humor, dignity. It made something twist in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name. One night, rain lashed against the glass walls as they worked. David leaned back, rubbing his eyes. You ever notice how silence makes people nervous? Ethan glanced up. What do you mean? David smiled. In this building, silence feels like failure. But sometimes, silence is just peace. Ethan looked out the window. I wouldn't know. My world doesn't allow peace. David studied him. Maybe that's why you built it this way. Noise makes you forget what hurts. Ethan froze. The truth landed too close. He forced a smirk. You sound like a therapist. Just a janitor who's seen too many broken things, David replied softly. For a moment, Ethan didn't know whether to feel insulted or understood. Then he just nodded. Maybe we're both trying to fix something. Days turned into weeks. The project, an algorithm for optimizing global supply chains, began to take shape. Ethan found himself genuinely enjoying the process. For the first time in years, someone wasn't agreeing with him out of fear, they were challenging him out of truth. One night, while reviewing data, David laughed at a minor mistake Ethan made. See? Even geniuses drop decimals. Ethan looked up, pretending to scowl. Careful, Cole. I could still fire you. David grinned. You'd have to clean your own office. Ethan tried to stay stern, but a small, rare smile tugged at his lips. Something was changing, slowly, quietly, beautifully. A week later, the board demanded a progress presentation. David and Ethan stood side by side in the conference room, dozens of skeptical eyes on them. David spoke first, explaining his portion with calm authority. His voice was steady, his ideas were clear. Ethan, watching from the side, realized that this man didn't just solve problems. He inspired solutions. When the presentation ended, Vivian Cross nodded approvingly. "Gentlemen, this is impressive. Keep it going." As everyone left, Ethan turned to David. "You were good in there." David smiled. "You weren't bad yourself, boss." "Ethan," he corrected quietly. "Just Ethan." It was the first time he'd ever said that to anyone below his rank. David hesitated, then extended his hand. "All right, Ethan." For a moment, it wasn't a CEO and a janitor. It was two men who had stopped pretending. Later that night, David found a small note on his workstation. "Good work today. You make me see things I forgot to notice." He smiled, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his wallet beside the photo of his late wife. Weeks slipped by. The project thrived. Prototypes ran smoothly, reports came back flawless. And yet, for Ethan Ward, success had begun to feel different. It wasn't the applause of investors that thrilled him anymore. It was the quiet nod from David Cole each time a design worked. But curiosity gnawed at him. Who was this man before the uniform? He tried to ask, but David always deflected with humor. So one night, after everyone left, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He looked for truth, not control. He called HR. "Pull me Cole's original application," he said. Minutes later, the file appeared on his screen. Employment records, address, emergency contact, education, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dropout 2003. Reason, family crisis. Attached was a note from an old reference, brilliant mind. Lost his scholarship after multiple absences caring for his terminally ill wife. Ethan read the words twice, then closed the laptop. For the first time, shame stung sharper than pride. The next evening, while David adjusted circuitry in their prototype, Ethan lingered behind him. "You left MIT, he said quietly. David froze. "Yeah. You were top of your class." A small shrug. "Doesn't matter now." "It matters," Ethan pressed. David looked up, eyes calm but guarded. "My wife got sick. Stage 4 lymphoma. I could either chase dreams or hold her hand. I chose her." Silence filled the lab like oxygen. Ethan's throat tightened. "I didn't know." "Didn't ask," David replied softly. He turned back to the circuit board, soldering in silence. Ethan wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words jammed in his throat. That night, guilt drove him to an old habit: research. He found the hospital records, the obituary, a community fundraiser photo. There she was, Angela Cole, smiling from a wheelchair, little Lila in her lap. The caption read, "He built her a custom hospital bed from scrap metal when the insurance wouldn't pay." Ethan stared until the words blurred. He shut his computer and left his penthouse, rain pelting the windows as if punishing him. He drove until he reached Cedar Hill Cemetery, headlights slicing through mist. Under a maple tree, a modest headstone read, "Angela Cole, beloved wife and mother, 1981 to 2009. Ethan stood there, umbrella trembling, guilt heavier than rain. "David gave up the world for you," he whispered, and Ethan mocked him for it. For the first time in years, Ethan Ward, the billionaire who feared nothing, felt small enough to pray. The next morning, he found David in the break room, coffee steaming between his hands. "Cedar Hill's beautiful," Ethan said gently. David blinked, then stiffened. "You went there?" I needed to understand. David's jaw tightened. Some things aren't yours to understand, sir. Ethan, he corrected softly. Just Ethan. A long pause. David exhaled, anger dissolving into exhaustion. She was everything. I thought if I worked hard enough, prayed long enough, maybe she'd stay. But she didn't. Ethan sat across from him. And now you clean floors in my company. David smiled faintly. Because I promised her I'd raise Lila honest. Hard work's honest. Ethan looked down at his untouched coffee. You kept your promise. Most of us break ours. For a long while, neither man spoke. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence. Finally, Ethan said, You ever think about going back? To engineering? David chuckled softly. At my age? Who'd take me seriously? I would, Ethan said. And maybe that's a start. That afternoon, Ethan called his assistant. Get me everything on scholarship programs for adult learners. Quietly. David didn't know, but the gears of redemption had begun to turn. A few days later, they met again to finalize the algorithm. David adjusted a variable, and suddenly, the entire model stabilized, an elegant solution glowing green on the screen. He laughed, eyes bright. You see that? That's balance. Ethan smiled. So simple. So impossible. David nodded. Like forgiveness. Ethan's expression softened. Do you forgive me? David looked at him for a long time, then said, I think you're still learning how to ask. They both laughed quietly. That night, Ethan walked to the elevator beside David. You ever miss her? Ethan asked. Every day, David replied. But she's in everything I fix. Every light that works, every kid I help. She's still here. Ethan swallowed hard. I lost someone once too. Called off an engagement because I loved my work more. Now I have the work, not the love. David studied him, then said gently, maybe it's not too late to learn what love actually looks like. Ethan looked away. Maybe that's what this project is really about. David smiled. Then let's finish it right. When they finally shut down the lights that night, the office glowed with the soft blue hue of success. Two men, one who had everything but soul, one who had lost everything but faith, walked out side by side. For the first time, Ethan felt lighter. For the first time, David felt seen. The project room had begun to feel less like a lab and more like a refuge. Cables, screens, and the smell of coffee surrounded them, yet the air carried an ease that hadn't existed before. David arrived each morning with 2 mugs instead of 1. You take cream, right? Ethan frowned the first time. How do you know that? David grinned. Watched you pour half a jug into your cup for weeks. Habits tell stories. Ethan chuckled. What do mine tell? That you drink like a man trying to sweeten regret. The remark should have stung, but instead it made Ethan laugh. An honest, human laugh that startled both of them. As the algorithm neared completion, Ethan began inviting David into meetings. The engineers were skeptical at first, but David's ideas silenced doubts within minutes. He spoke in plain language, turning complex equations into relatable images. The system isn't about numbers, he explained. It's about people. If a single link in the chain feels unseen, the whole structure weakens. Ethan caught himself watching David, admiring not just his mind but his presence. For the first time, the CEO listened without needing to lead. Friday evening, David brought someone new to the office. His daughter, Lila, now 13. She darted between desks, curious and confident. Ethan knelt to greet her. So, you're the genius behind the genius? She giggled. Daddy says I'm the reason he still tries. Then I owe you a thank you, Ethan said sincerely. They spent the evening eating takeout noodles while David and Lila teased Ethan for using too many napkins. For a moment, laughter filled a space once ruled by tension. When Lila left with a hug and a wave, Ethan felt something foreign and warm swell in his chest. He'd built skyscrapers, yet nothing had ever felt as tall as that simple human connection. Later, alone with David, Ethan asked quietly, "Do you ever think Angela would have wanted you to move on? Maybe even love again?" David smiled sadly. "Love doesn't disappear, it just changes address." Ethan looked down. "I envy that kind of faith." David replied, "Faith's just remembering light even when it's dark." They worked in silence after that, but the air between them carried a peace neither had known in years. Weeks later, the prototype went live. Investors were thrilled. The board applauded. Vivian Cross approached Ethan afterward. "This might be your most profitable project yet." Ethan shook his head. "No, it's the most meaningful." She arched an eyebrow. "You've changed." He smiled. "I'm learning to." That night, as the city lights blinked below, Ethan and David clinked glasses of cheap champagne in paper cups. To new beginnings, Ethan toasted. David grinned. And to old floors cleaned right. They laughed until tears formed, two broken halves slowly discovering wholeness. Outside, thunder rolled over the skyline, but inside, everything felt still. For once, Ethan didn't check his phone or his stock prices. He just listened, to the rain, to David's quiet hum of an old jazz tune, to the peace of being real. Can true respect grow between people from completely different worlds? Or does one side always give more? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. The morning of the launch should have been a celebration. Ward Technology's new algorithm had already drawn headlines, "A revolution in supply chains." Investors crowded the lobby, cameras flashed, employees rehearsed applause. David arrived early, wearing his one good suit, Lila's Lucky Charm bracelet tucked in his pocket. He'd promised to call her after the presentation. "We made it, baby girl," he whispered, smiling. Ethan was on the phone when David entered, pacing, tension coiled in every step. Vivian Cross stood near the window, arms folded. "The board wants you to take sole credit," she said when Ethan hung up. Ethan's stomach dropped. "That's not negotiable." "It isn't up to you anymore," she replied. "They're worried about optics. Investors trust you, not a janitor." He slammed a fist onto the desk. "He's not a janitor. He's the reason this works." Vivian's tone didn't soften. "Then tell that to the shareholders who just doubled your company's value. Do this one thing, and later, you can honor him." Quietly. Silence. Ethan's pride and guilt fought a silent war. Finally, he whispered, "I'll fix it afterward." An hour later, the ballroom lights dimmed, and Ethan took the stage to thunderous applause. Screens behind him blazed with his name. He saw David standing at the edge of the crowd, expectant, proud. Ethan hesitated, the words, "We built this together," hovering on his tongue. Then he saw the board's eyes, cameras, millions watching. He forced a smile. "Today," he said into the microphone, "I'm proud to introduce my team's greatest innovation, the Ward algorithm." The crowd roared, and David's world went silent. He stood motionless as people clapped, as Ethan's name echoed. The betrayal didn't come with shouting. It came with the ache of being erased. He turned, walked out of the ballroom, and didn't look back. When the lights faded and the crowd dispersed, Ethan found himself alone backstage. Vivian congratulated him. "You saved the company." He nodded numbly. Her heels clicked away, leaving only the sound of applause echoing from another room, hollow now, meaningless. He searched the crowd for David but found only an empty chair. David returned to his apartment in the rain. Lila was waiting, eyes bright. "Did they cheer for you, Daddy?" He forced a smile that cracked his heart. "They cheered for the project." "Then that means you, right?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "Sure, sweetheart. That means me." When she went to bed, he sat alone at the kitchen table, the TV playing Ethan's speech again. The cheerin' read, "Ward Technologies CEO unveils genius algorithm." Not a single mention of his name. He turned off the screen, picked up his toolbox, and opened an old envelope of bills. He whispered, "Back to cleaning floors, huh?" Tears he hadn't shed since Angela's funeral finally fell. At that same hour, Ethan sat in his penthouse, staring at his reflection. The trophy on his desk gleamed under the city lights, cold, perfect, empty. He tried to tell himself he'd done the right thing, that he'd protect David later. But each justification rang hollow. He poured a drink, then another, then threw the glass against the wall. Shards sparkled like truth. 2 weeks passed. David quit without notice. Security collected his badge, HR filed the paperwork. The story faded from headlines. Ethan's company soared, but every success tasted like ash. One evening, Vivian entered his office. "Investors want a follow-up announcement." Ethan stared at her. "Call it off." She frowned. "Why?" "Because the man who built it isn't here to see it." She studied him. "You made your choice." He looked up, eyes tired. "Then maybe I chose wrong." That night, Ethan opened the folder where David had scribbled notes, ink smudged, corners torn. In the margin was a line David had once quoted, "If one link feels unseen, the whole structure weakens." Ethan closed the folder and whispered, "I see you now." But it was too late. The applause had long faded, but the echo stayed. 2 months after the launch, Ethan Ward was a man the world envied and he despised. Ward Technologies had tripled in value. Investors called him a visionary. Magazines called him the mind of a generation. But the silence in his penthouse was louder than ever. The desk was neat, the trophy glimmered, and on the glass wall, the old riddle still faintly showed where a janitor had once written the answer. He couldn't look at it without shame burning his throat. That night, Ethan returned to the office after everyone had gone home. He turned off the lights, let the city's glow paint the room in gold and blue. Then he poured himself a drink and watched security footage from weeks ago, the night of the launch. Frame by frame, he saw David standing at the back of the ballroom. When the crowd applauded, David didn't move. He just lowered his head, turned, and walked out. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was hurt. Ethan sank into his chair. "God," he whispered, "what did I do?" The next morning he called HR. "Where is he now?" The answer hit him like a blow. David had taken a part-time job teaching math at a community center. No address on file. Ethan ended the call and sat back, eyes closed. All his life he'd chosen pride. Pride had built his empire. But pride had also left him alone. He looked around his office. The glass, the marble, the emptiness. Everything reflected success. Nothing reflected meaning. He thought of David's words that day in the lab. "Silence isn't failure. Sometimes it's peace." He wanted that peace. And the only way to earn it was to speak the truth. That evening, Ward Technologies hosted its annual press conference. Cameras, investors, and the board filled the room. Ethan walked onto the stage. No speech cards, no teleprompter, no smile. Vivian whispered, "What are you doing?" He ignored her. He faced the crowd and said, "Before I begin, there's something I need to confess." The murmurs started instantly. "The algorithm that built this company's future wasn't mine," he said. "It was created by a man most of you never noticed. A man who cleaned these floors while solving problems the rest of us couldn't even see. Guess. Flashbulbs." His name is David Cole. He was my janitor, my teacher, and my friend. And I took his moment away because I was afraid. Afraid to admit that genius can live anywhere, in anyone. The room was silent. Cameras rolled. Vivian paled. Ethan's voice cracked. I can rebuild companies, but I can't rebuild respect unless I tell the truth. The real inventor deserves his name back. He stepped away from the microphone. The applause began hesitantly, then grew into thunder. For once, the noise didn't sound like vanity. It sounded like forgiveness trying to find him. Later that night, Ethan drove across town to the community center. Through the window, he saw David at a whiteboard surrounded by kids. Equations filled the board, laughter filled the room. Ethan waited outside, heart pounding. When David finally stepped into the parking lot, he froze at the sight of him. Ethan. David. They stood under a flickering streetlight. I saw the press conference, David said. You didn't have to do that. I did, Ethan replied. It was the only thing left worth doing. David crossed his arms. So what now? You get to feel like the hero again? Ethan shook his head. No. I just needed to say I was wrong. I stole your name. I can't undo it, but I can make sure the world knows who you are. David studied him for a long time. The anger had faded, replaced by quiet exhaustion. You really mean that? Ethan nodded. Every word. For a moment, they just stood there, rain beginning to fall. Then David said softly, You know what forgiveness is, Ethan? What? It's choosing not to keep count. I stopped counting the day I walked out. Ethan swallowed hard. Does that mean you forgive me? David smiled faintly. It means I remember the good more than the bad. And that's enough. They shook hands, no cameras, no contracts, no witnesses. Just two men reclaiming their humanity. Later, as Ethan drove home, he felt lighter. Not redeemed entirely, but real. The city no longer looked like gold. It looked alive. He whispered, Thank you, to the night. Somewhere across town, David sat in his classroom, writing a new equation on the board. This one wasn't numbers, it was words. Truth plus courage equals peace. 3 months later, war technologies looked very different. The gleaming lobby now displayed a new plaque beneath the company logo. The Cole Ward Innovation Lab, where every mind matters. Visitors stopped to read the inscription. Employees slowed their steps to smile. What began as scandal had become a movement, an initiative that funded education for overlooked workers, custodians, and service staff who dreamed beyond their stations. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, David stood beside Ethan once more, Lila holding his hand. Reporters filled the courtyard, microphones angled toward them. Ethan stepped forward first. This company was built on brilliance, he began. But brilliance means nothing without heart. The man beside me reminded me that talent doesn't wear a title, it simply needs to be seen. He turned toward David. I once told him silence isn't peace. He proved that sometimes it is. Applause rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Yet amid the noise, David leaned over and whispered, You did good, Ethan. Ethan smiled. No, we did good. After the ceremony, Ethan joined David and Lila at a small diner near the river. No suits, no cameras, just 3 people sharing fries and laughter. Lila showed Ethan her science project. It's about renewable energy, she said proudly. Ethan studied her notes. That's better than half my R&D team's work. David chuckled. Don't inflate her ego. She already thinks she's smarter than both of us. Lila grinned. That's because I am. For a moment, Ethan felt what family might have been, a warmth that couldn't be bought or built. He didn't envy it anymore, he was part of it. Later that week, David visited the top floor alone. The boardroom still held the faint outline of the original riddle on the glass wall. He picked up a marker and wrote beneath it, "What's the rarest wealth in the world?" Ethan entered quietly behind him. "Still chasing riddles?" David smiled. "Always." Ethan stepped closer. "Mind if I try this one?" David handed him the marker. Ethan wrote a single word. "Humility." They stood together, the skyline glittering before them, reflections overlapping in the glass. One man who had learned to bend, one who had learned to believe again. Ethan said softly, "You know, that first night you solved my problem, I thought you'd embarrassed me." David chuckled. "You just didn't realize I was giving you the answer to a different equation." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" David met his eyes. "The one that teaches a man how to see worth in others and himself." They shared a long, quiet laugh. When David left the room, he paused at the elevator and looked back. Ethan stood at the window, the word humility glowing behind him like a halo of glass and light. David whispered to himself, "Looks good on him," and pressed the button. Months later, the Coal Ward initiative expanded nationwide. Former janitors became engineers. Cashiers became coders. And every graduation ceremony began with the same quote etched in stone. "Genius has no title, only courage." David taught full-time, content, his daughter thriving. Ethan continued to run the company, but no longer from isolation. His office door now stayed open, the floor once polished by David's hands now filled with dreamers who dared to believe they mattered. One evening, Ethan visited David's classroom unannounced. "Thought you might need a guest speaker," he said. David grinned. "Only if you're ready for tough questions." A small boy raised his hand. "Mr. Ward, is it true you were really rich but really sad?" Ethan laughed. "Yes, it's true. Turns out money can buy everything except peace." Another child asked, "So how do you get peace?" Ethan looked toward David. "You tell the truth even when it costs you everything." The room was quiet, the kind of silence that heals. When class ended, the two men stepped outside. The evening air smelled of chalk dust and spring rain. Ethan turned to David. "You ever think we'd end up here?" David smiled. "No. But maybe the hardest equations have the most beautiful answers." Ethan nodded, gazing at the horizon. "Thank you for solving mine." David chuckled. "Anytime, partner." They walked toward the parking lot, side by side, two lives that had started on opposite ends of a building now finishing the same story. After everything you've seen, what is the rarest kind of wealth to you? Power, money, forgiveness, or humility? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to read your take. Thank you so much for watching till the very end. I hope you truly felt this story as much as I did telling it. We've got plenty more powerful stories waiting for you, so don't stop here. Just click on the video showing on your screen right now and keep the journey going. I'll see you in the next one.